What is up, guys? Welcome back to Better Plays Ahead. I am your host, Sam Wagman. With me, for at least this stream, not next week, but we'll figure that out when we get to it, is Jeff Hicks, our college basketball betting expert. Jeff, how did you do? Round of 64.
We pretend that most of it didn't happen, but I feel like that's most people. Betting wise, though, I feel like it was a productive first 2 days, especially with my initial thought process of betting the underdogs anywhere between the 11 and 14 seeds immediately once lines came out. That ended up being more profitable than not, just because plus money bets are going to make a lot more money and stuff like that. But overall, pretty good. How about you, Sam?
It looks like I chose every wrong underdog at this point. Let's see. Chose Charleston over Alabama, but took St. Mary's over Grand Canyon, took Oregon over South Carolina, but took New Mexico over Clemson. It's just been an absolute mess for me this week. But, this show is not about me. This show is about winning people money. And we did a ton of that in the first show here. So let's go ahead and just touch on some of those bets real quick. Is there anything that we talked about from the first show that kind of surprised you from, our betting side of things?
I was a little surprised at how poorly St. Mary's played last night. I thought that they were the better team that had a similar mindset going into it. And
Mhm.
it pretty much after the first 5 minutes of the first half, it was like I don't need to watch this anymore. I kind of figure out where this is going. And the same happened with New Mexico as well, too. And that's partially my fault. Originally kind of going like, okay, this is a good team. Mountain West was underseeded, this, that, and the other. And then, of course, the ACC teams were good this year. It's more top heavy than it has been in the past, but Clemson did everything that they had to. They had the perfect game, and pretty much from start to finish led over the Lobos. Those are probably the biggest surprises for me. How about you,
Yeah.
Sam?
Those Mountain West teams really, really shit the bed, honestly, for
Mm-hmm.
us. All over the place here, really. From Nevada to New Mexico to St. Mary's. It really kind of was an absolute mess from, a standpoint of thinking that the Mountain West Conference was underseeded, because it really did seem that way, from net rating to Ken Palm. We thought we had some, nice seeded underdogs on there, and it just kind of really did not shake out that way. So definitely was very surprised by that. Healthy amount of upsets either way, despite me not picking seemingly any of them. It was nice to see Bruce Pearl get escorted out by Yale in the first round, and obviously the Kentucky and Oakland upset was very wild. I'm sure that was probably the biggest upset of the week so far. I
Mm-hmm.
think plenty of people had Kentucky in their Sweet 16s and in their Elite Eights, and definitely plenty in the Final Four as well. Is there any other upset that you saw that just came out of left field completely besides St. Mary's?
Like I knew Yale could play good. It's one again, very, very much us, junior, senior late and stuff like that. And it was kind of nice to see them they just didn't give up.
Mhm.
And Auburn was more than happy to give away that game. And I think part of the issue is Yale couldn't do any better than getting, the guys for the Tigers, to the foul line. And it was two guys that shoot over 80% and one guy that shoots 90% on the season. And all three of them, two of them missed the front of a 1-and-1, and another missed the first. And then was forced to miss the second and stuff like that. So it was a game where Yale did everything they had to just to keep it within arm's reach. And Auburn was more than happy to give it away.
Yeah, I definitely thought that, just the way that game looked down the stretch. I only caught the second half of that game, so I definitely missed a lot of it. But watching Auburn just flail around at the end of that game when they had the chance through, free throws and, after they cut the lead to 2, like they just had 2 or 3 chances to really tie that game back up and just didn't take advantage of it at all whatsoever. So definitely looked like missed opportunities all around there. but I had them losing to San Diego State in the round of 32 anyway, so I'm perfectly okay with that. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. When we look at kind of betting and bracket strategy, after round one, is there anything that you think you're going to do different going forward? As we head into the second weekend of the tournament here, with all these teams, are you going to stick to your strategy of playing underdogs all the way? Do you plan to hop into any of these like second chance tournament challenges? What's your plan there?
I think, well, obviously our first brackets are set, so the good thing is I don't have to look at it anymore. The good thing is I don't have any like complete like regions completely dead, especially when you're talking every bracket has been busted in America.
Mhm.
But I think I
Warren
can at
Buffett
least,
wins again, by the way.
oh God, yeah. And I think it's more paying attention betting going forward. I think when I was looking, especially for making these round of 32 bets, what are we looking at for over unders? Because we saw some teams advance that we didn't necessarily think were going to. Like I didn't have Grand Canyon, but now you have that team that can score going up against Alabama, who had no problem getting to the century mark, which was very
Mhm.
much in play from the get go, and they crushed their over. They're one of three teams to beat the century mark. So now we have a couple of situations where are the books going to tempt us by pushing numbers, like 175 for overs, especially if you're looking at Alabama? Are we going to see a couple of 150s depending on who's the matchup and stuff like that? But I think spreads aren't necessarily going to be my favorite unless it's teams that we all really get to watch more often. And that's one of the things. You have so many teams in college basketball. Like I don't get to watch Gonzaga all the time, but I have an idea of what to expect because Mark Few's been their coach, since like the Clinton administration, it feels like. So like there's
Right.
there's stuff like that to take advantage of, but I think it's going to be a game by game basis. And with each new matchup and each line that's posted, it's one of those things you got to stay vigilant with lines. You got to stay vigilant when books are going to post up lines, and you got to prioritize which sports books you want to go to because some are going to have them a lot quicker than others.
Yeah. I think for me at this point, I'm going to stay away from single game lines. I'm going to focus a little bit more on futures, Elite Eights, Sweet 16s, Final Four lines like that, because I think there's probably a little bit more value to bite off on those lines at this
Mm-hmm.
point. I think, the majority of people are not going to be paying attention to futures until we reach the Elite Eight. That's the second weekend of the tournament. So I would be, more willing to get ahead on some of those future lines on teams that I saw looked really good during the round of 64 and, obviously after the round of 32 as well. So I think that's more of an advantageous strategy, at least, for me. And I'm going to, look around and see if I can do any of those second chance tournament challenges because I am a glutton for punishment. So, obviously my brackets have gone so bad that, despite the fact that all of my Elite Eights are still alive, like I got so many things wrong during the round of 64 that I think it's time to start over completely. But going ahead there, we're gonna hop into some bets. But before you guys do that, if you guys have any questions, any games that you want us to go over specifically, feel free to hop in the comments and drop a matchup that you like. We're gonna go over one or two from each region, just like we did on the first show, and then once we get all of that done, don't forget to go on over to thegameday.com. Check out all of our betting promos and best bets. We have bets for every single game coming out. They'll be posted at least a day or two before the matchups happen. So, every single game that happens during this year's March Madness, we will have a betting preview for. So make sure you go check that out at thegameday.com. You can check that out thegameday.com/news or just by going to our homepage and scrolling around because we will have previews for everything there. But all right, let's hop into some of these matchups. We're going to start with the West region, just like we did before. And it seems like the premier matchup for this weekend is going to be UNC versus Michigan State. And I had Michigan State losing in the first round, so I have no idea how they got here. But once I saw that UNC opened up at 3.5 points, I immediately clicked the Tar Heels to win that game. So I think you did as well. Tell us why.
Yes, I agree 100% with that. And the reason why Michigan State got there is because Tom Izzo is he's that dude. He is an excellent coach. They also have enough seniors on there to where that matters. Obviously, scoring is still going to be an issue. But one thing that Michigan State used to get to the next round was the rebounding. They out rebounded Mississippi State. But one thing that led me to take 3.5 with UNC is that Mississippi State still beat the Spartans in offensive rebounds. So like that's a major thing. Second chance points and stuff like that. You know, it didn't obviously, work out well for Mississippi State, but a team like UNC can absolutely make teams pay with second chance points.
Yep.
And I still think that the under can hit while the Tar Heels cover that game. I just think that when one team wants to run a little bit more, like UNC and Michigan State's going to want to slow down, you're just giving the more athletic team in North Carolina the opportunity to get set. And we got to give Hubert Davis some credit too. He's not a bad coach. Like, Tom Izzo is going to go down as one of the greatest college basketball and probably greatest coaches of all time. But I just think that the spread only being essentially, barely 2 possessions, I think that still favors the Tar Heels. But I think, like I mentioned before, having a good leadership core with the Spartans is going to limit possessions in that game, and I think that's why the under has a chance of hitting more than the over in that situation.
Yeah, I definitely think that Michigan State's going to try and slow things down. Like you said, 305th ranked pace of play by them. But I just think UNC is too talented. They have too many stars on that roster. Specifically RJ Davis. I think that's really just going to absolutely crush any chance that Michigan State has of winning this game. And I was kind of surprised that the spread opened so low there. It's a classic case of us thinking, what do the books know that we don't for this game? But that's definitely going to be one of the more public lines of the weekend. But I have no problem hopping on it for a team that I realistically think can win the championship. And Michigan State, I wasn't even sure they were going to win a single game in this tournament coming in. So, yeah. Anything else in the West region for you to note before we move on?
No, I think that region, it still comes down to Arizona and North Carolina mainly. I think both of them really showed why. They were the 1 and 2 seeds. Yes, they're in the weakest region possible. But I still think it comes down to those two teams. And the good thing is too, we're talking about that 3.5 number, just, not, being one that you would shy away from. The public is still kind of split. Like they're using recency bias towards the Spartans because they're getting 42% of the bets at plus 3.5. So it's not something that's completely mushed yet. And that makes me very happy.
Do you see any of the bigger seeds being able to make a run in this region at all, given that we kind of predicted that this was going to be the region with the most instability in terms of things holding to chalk? So obviously we had 9 seed beat 8 seed, we had 12 seed beat 5 seed. Plenty of people picked Charleston to upset Alabama. Alabama really looked very, very good there, did not. And then obviously Clemson, showed out there. Do you have any hope in any of those seeds being able to take down North Carolina or Arizona? Or is it just going to be a North Carolina, Arizona Elite Eight and all of the instability will be figured out before then?
I think they may have to work. Like as good as Alabama looked, 109 points is nothing to, scoff at or anything, but there was a lot.
They did allow 96 points to Charleston.
And again, that's their thing. They can score 90, but they'll give up 90 on top of that. But they had some sloppy play at points. And Mark Sears, who was just amazing last night.
Incredible.
Like, if he misses a couple of those shots, and he hit some very tough shots, like that game could be very different. And that's probably something that Grand Canyon can take advantage of. Again, I don't know if Grand Canyon wins, but they showed last night that there's a real you can't fade them completely. But I think North Carolina is leaps and bounds better than either of those teams. And I think Baylor has a little bit more to worry about, but I think they showed out pretty good in their first round game. And I think Clemson, can give them at least a go. I think these teams are all going to have to work to get where they're going to, but I still favor North Carolina and Clemson and
Okay.
Arizona.
Okay. All right. Sounds good to me. All right. Let's move on over to the Midwest region. And, one of the matchups that honestly could be one of the best matchups of the tournament. You have two blue bloods here in Gonzaga and Kansas. And man, Kansas came this close to getting their ass kicked out of the tournament by 13th seed Sanford, no less. So it's not too surprising that they opened as 4.5 point dogs to the Gonzaga Bulldogs here. So why don't we go through that?
Um, uh, it's a depth game. That's the big thing. Clearly, not having McCullough Jr. is going to be an issue for Kansas, and that was against Sanford, who was, even if McCullough played, was going to be a tough matchup for them.
Yep.
But even with coaching, there's no real lean one way or the other because Mark Few and Bill Self are both excellent coaches. I just think
I would give the edge to Few at this point, I think.
I think at this point, just because, Self only has, when you only got so many bullets left in the chamber, there's only so much you can do. But he's going to have to be very judicious with his players and fouls. This game's going to come down to fouls. Like if Kansas can't stop anything inside, their best players could just be forced to sit. And then you're talking about guys that don't get a lot of play normally having to get rotation minutes, and that could just absolutely crush Kansas here. But I think Gonzaga, who people were kind of split on, and they were only 5.5 point favorites against McNeese State. They went out there and just bullied them all game. I think getting 4.5, I think they set the line there more because you got the name values. And the good thing is you can still get minus 105 at ESPN Bets right now. So it's minus 110 pretty much everywhere. Books flirted with -4 at a couple of points, but it didn't last very long. I think also, too, what matters is Kansas's offense took a step back this year. And in terms of taking a step back, it moved down to the mid-80s in Ken Palm's adjusted offensive efficiency. And while for most teams, that's not really a big deal when you're talking about a perennial Big 12 favorite and a team that a lot of times is expected to at least make it to the Elite Eight. Sweet 16 just isn't enough, and making Final Four is, pretty much their expectation. Dropping down from the mid-20s to go to the mid-80s year to year, that's a big difference. And Gonzaga is a top 20 team, according to, I think I read it was like something like 4 different efficiency ratings, including net, KenPom. There's a whole bunch of them out there that have them rated offensively, defensively as one of the best teams. And just, we got to remember the West Coast Conference was a lot better this year. So them being a 5 seed and finishing second in the conference tourney, finishing second in the regular season, that's actually not a bad thing. It wasn't because they had that much of a down year.
Right. And I do think that Gonzaga is, one of the few underrated teams that are left in this tournament. I know that sounds weird to say when we're talking about Gonzaga. They've been one of the best teams over the last decade in college basketball. But, this is not the Gonzaga Bulldogs of old for sure. But I do think they're going to be in a good spot in this game. Without McCullough for Kansas, that provides, a huge weight off of their shoulders there.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're talking about Hunter Dickinson, who is obviously just this absolute monster down low, I think Graham Ike is going to be able to shut him down, pretty simply. And once you shut down Dickinson, or at least limit him, I think this opens up Gonzaga to really, get going there. And, just let Nemhard and Anton Watson, go in and do their thing and, try and shut down Dickinson down low as much as you can. I think Gonzaga goes on a run in this game and wins close to double digits. So, I don't think the Kansas Jayhawks are the team that we've seen them to be this season earlier, especially without, arguably their best player there. So I'd be worried about backing them in this matchup as a dog, given how they looked, the other day. So give me the Bulldogs here as well.
Yeah, we're talking, it could be a wake-up call, but I just think the lack of depth is more of the issue to overcome instead of like, hey, we were put on warning by Sanford. Yep. I think that's what's going to be the big thing is you can take warning, but when you just don't have the players to compete with teams that are much deeper, it becomes an issue from the moment the ball's tipped off.
So, speaking of taking warning, should Rick Barnes in Tennessee also be taking warning of be on upset watch at this point against the Longhairs? Why don't we touch quickly on that game before we move on to the next conference?
Rick Barnes is perpetually on upset watch. And it goes to show he's the worst coach against the spread in this tournament, and that was and that was going into it in the round of 64, not even getting to the round of 32 here. It's a game that I just want to avoid. Obviously, they have Dalton Connect, who's just a dead red shooter. He's so good, and he's fun to watch too. But obviously, that's one of those things you take him out, and then that's when the secondary scoring, can be an issue at times, and then that's when Rick Barnes has to think harder than normal, and thinking harder, not smarter, is something that clearly he's had an issue with, no matter where he goes and coaches. But with the spread being essentially a 2-possession game, it's a clear avoid for me. I'd rather just kick up my feet and either watch a meltdown, or I hope it's a competitive game. I hope both teams just play good and it doesn't come down to coaching being the issue and stuff like that. But as we know, if you can't coach, some of these young guys and stuff like that, they make the errors on their own without the right coaching. So I'd rather watch that game and just enjoy it for what it is.
All right, sounds good to me. Yeah, I will not be taking Tennessee there now after hearing that. All right, let's move on over to the East region. Let's take a look at this Ivy League school that caused a massive upset that we touched on earlier against Auburn. So we got Yale versus SDSU, and why don't you take us through your handicap for this game?
So I want to take the over 128, which I got at Caesars at -110. And the reason for that is both these teams have very good defenses. Like I mentioned in our previous show, San Diego State also picked up their offense, and they won in spite of their poor 3-point shooting. And we know shooting is a game by game thing. When you only hit 3 and you're shooting essentially 33% or worse, there's always room for improvement. I think they ended up going like 3 for 20 in their first round game. Like that's awful. Like all you have to do is make 3 more, and you're looking at over for a lot of cases, because both these teams, putting up 60 plus points is in their DNA, and they're both just good enough too on defense to take care of that as well too. I want to give Yale credit too. Their out of conference schedule, the record doesn't indicate they played well. They did win against Colgate, who was a tournament team. They lost by 15 and 16 to Kansas and Gonzaga, respectively. And that's okay, because they went on the road and took those losses too. And as long as you're not getting blown up by 30 in those games, especially when you're talking, pre-January games and stuff like that, where teams are still kind of figuring themselves out, that doesn't look bad. And then they went to Vermont, who also lost in the first round. But again, tournament team, they went to Vermont and only lost by 1. So you're looking at a little bit more closer to your level of competition, and going on the road and only losing by 1 does matter. So Yale has played a tough schedule. It's top 60 in Ken Palm's adjusted strength of schedule and stuff like that. That gives me hope that, maybe not necessarily winning, but in terms of being able to score and make it a game, it's very much in play. And that's why I think 128 is a good number to take the over with.
Yeah, I think that's going to be actually an interesting game here. I think Yale is going to just come out here and play, basically with house money at this point. I do think San Diego State's the better team. Like I said earlier, I had them advancing to the Sweet 16 to begin with, going against UConn. I think both these teams would lose to UConn very, very easily, though. So I'm not going to favor one or the other here. I do think that's a very, very low total number there. So, you're asking both teams basically just score 65 points and you'll be perfectly fine. So, have to think regression's coming from the 3 there. Let's touch one more game in this region, and let's go down to the Duquesne versus Illinois matchup. And
I'd be remiss
this is probably the first matchup that I actually got right.
Yeah, this is one of those games where it's like I'd be remiss just being able to see Illinois and just having a little bit more insight. But the big thing is we saw what happens when Illinois plays any level of defense. That second half was a clinic in pretty much everything that everybody says about Illinois going the opposite. Their defense
Mhm.
showed up in the second half. Brad Underwood going to Dane Danger in the paint, just a massive game. And that when you get that tertiary scoring, because he's not really a secondary scorer for them and stuff like that. He picked up because Marcus Damask didn't have it in the first half shooting. He didn't score his first 2 points until I think there was like 3 minutes left in the half. So it's one of those things, he's not a guy that plays a lot of minutes necessarily. He's usually the first one subbed out, which is why when I say they don't have a true center, that's why I say that.
Mhm.
But when you get that tertiary scoring, you get Marcus Damask being a facilitator instead for most of that game when they needed one and stuff like that. Terrence Shannon just went absolutely nuts. And took advantage of driving it to Morehead State. He wasn't afraid of their size. And I think that's going to play again here against Duquesne, because Duquesne showed, even though they're more of a defensive team, they didn't have any issues getting to the basket against BYU. BYU laid down. And Duquesne also was extremely hot from three. That is not their calling card. They can shoot the ball when they want to, but like with Morehead State, you can shoot the three as much as you want, but it has to
Mhm.
go in. And when Illinois can close out on some of those decent 3-point shooters on Duquesne and stuff like that, you got to make those shots. But if you want to live by the three against Illinois, it could burn you, because that tempo, when you're running like that, it's very easy to get gas. And this is second game in 3 days. This is something that Illinois can take advantage of against Duquesne. So I expect Illinois to win. I have no lean on the spread in this case, because Illinois made the public look absolutely awful at plus 12.5 with Morehead State, because that league got really big, and then they just kept the foot on the gas.
Interesting. I do have Duquesne making it all the way to the Elite Eight in my bracket. So, we'll see. Based on how things have gone, I don't expect them to win this matchup, but it would be really, really cool if they were to make it to there. All right, let's go back to our last conference. We got the South region here. Let's talk about this Colorado and Marquette game, because obviously you were all over Marquette going to the Sweet 16 minus 130. And it honestly, the only reason that was hung there was because one, Tyler Kolek was, kind of up in the air whether he would play and how effective he would be. And two, Marquette came into this tournament as the lowest rated 2 seed. So, everyone was kind of thinking, well, they could, get knocked up their skis a little bit. Then, you got Florida and Colorado going out there scoring 200 combined points. It's been a long time since we've seen that happen in a college basketball game. So now you get Colorado versus Marquette. Marquette's 3-point favorite here over at Caesars. So why don't we go through that game?
So if you read my article about 5 first-round upsets, to pay attention to, it ended up going 3-2, which I'll take that. And one of them was Colorado over Florida, and I predicted that before Colorado even won their playing game. They
Because there was
continue.
no way Virginia was going to make it in.
No, and the thing is too, at least one team from the play-in that's won advances past the round of 64. And once Colorado State went down, it was up to Colorado, because no 16 play-in has ever advanced. So it's always been your 10 or 11 seed that's had to advance. And with Florida, down their big man and stuff, I was like, yeah, I got to take this. And again, guard play, and it was the difference in the 2 points that Colorado won by against Florida. So, and I think that rolls over against Marquette, and them only getting 3 points. That's the books leaning on a hot Colorado team. Because I would imagine they were to try to hang like 5 or 6, it would have got bet down immediately. So they didn't want to necessarily be liable for that. But I think you saw with Marquette, Kolek got some reps in. The first half was ugly, but that's been majority of games, so far in the tournament. And then Marquette turned it on, and you saw why for majority of the season, before injuries started plaguing them, why they were considered a borderline 1 seed, from non-conference play all the way through the beginning of conference play. And I think Colorado playing their 3rd game in 5 days matters. Like it's a big thing. These teams don't do that. That's not how schedules work, thankfully, because that's awful for a lot of these kids that actually, are, trying to get degrees, unless, they're, true NBA players they don't have to worry about that. But I think the gas tank runs a little empty for Colorado. And it's just one of those things that Marquette is healthy. That makes a
Yeah.
difference. And I would love to cash that minus 130 ticket because BetMGM was very kind enough just to, gift that to bettors.
Definitely, really like that. And, from on paper, this is definitely a slam dunk pick for Marquette. So knowing me, it'll end up being anything but that once I take this bet right after this show ends. But before we get out of here, I want to touch on one more upset minded team that got out of the round of 64 with a surprising win over a single digit seed, and that is JMU going up against Duke in this game. Let's talk about that one real quick.
So I think this was a case of misseeding. You could have had James Madison as an 11 and would have been justified. You could have had Wisconsin all the way down to a 7 seed and it would have been justified, because you want to talk about a team that made it on their shooting. It was Wisconsin, and they showed why they were on upset alert from the moment that matchup was announced, because they are unathletic. And James Madison, they attacked immediately. They went to the basket, and they were met with little resistance at times. Obviously, Wisconsin was hitting their shots towards the end of the first half, and it carried over into the second half enough. But at a certain point, when you just got guys that have no fear inside, and they're hitting their shots from outside as well too, you get James Madison, and I think that's going to lead to an over. It's at 148 right now between Duke and James Madison. I think
Mhm.
both of those teams can get to the basket. I think if you're going to be James Madison, you're going to want to attack Filipowski right away. It's one of those things, you know who their best player is. So on offense, you got to try to make him earn it. And he's a very good defensive player. So it may not work right away, but I think that's going to be a plan of attack. And both teams are good enough from outside. One thing that both teams also do very well, they are not prone to turnovers. And I think that's going to matter. They're both in top 45 in turnover rates on
Mhm.
offense, and James Madison's defense is also top 50 in the nation and creating turnovers as well too. So we're going to see a true battle of what happens when it comes down to a really important possession. Who's going to have the ball and who isn't, and does it turn into transition points? Does it turn into building a lead, cutting down a lead? But I think both of these teams are going to want to be efficient with their shots, and I think that leads to an over in this case. This is one of those games I mentioned. Are we going to see a couple of games go to 150 as a total? And I wouldn't be surprised before tomorrow this game at least gets to 149.
Yeah, absolutely. I do actually think that Duke is just going to roundhouse kick JMU out of this game, but wouldn't be surprised to see JMU put up some points given what we've seen. Um, Anything else you want to touch on before we go down out of here?
Um, I will be gone next week, which is a bummer. So I won't be able to do the shows leading into the Sweet 16. And on top of that, I'm going to be in a state without legal betting. So pretty much for the next 24 hours before I peace out for a week, I am going to be feverishly betting as much as possible. So
Lovely.
and like Sam said, look at the futures. Now's a great time to get some value and stuff like that before matchups are even set. You can look at your upset minded teams, and aim for an Elite Eight appearance for some of them and stuff like that. So get your value now, because the books are going to only crunch things tighter and tighter when they have less games to pay attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. But, we're going to get on out of here. Make sure you guys head on over to thegameday.com. You check out all of our betting promos and best bets and offers. Have everything ranging from DraftKings to FanDuel to BetMGM to Caesars, ESPN Bet. We have all of them over there at thegameday.com. You can check everything out over there. And thank you guys for tuning in. We'll be back middle of next week, most likely Tuesday or Wednesday, to break down the Sweet 16 games. And we will see you guys then.